Here's a general guide of what we're going to be doing today. When we approach our writing prompt for writing task 1, we are going to first complete step 1, and that is analyze the table and plan how to group the information. Like I said earlier, we're going to look either at a date or a date range. Then the second step is going to be writing an essay using the recommended essay structure. And the structure is very important because it will keep everything in a very clear and logical way. But first things first, let's look at step 1, because step 1 actually has 2 sub-steps. And of course, we are going to analyze the table, but with that comes A and B. So in order to effectively complete step 1, we're going to first approach A, and we're going to organize the information into 2 categories. And the difficult thing with dates is that there are usually more than 2 dates. There's usually a date range, and so we have to understand how to best categorize all those dates. Then, once we organize the information into these 2 categories, we are going to describe the key information from each category. So we're going to be looking at specifics, but we're not going to include all of the information. That would be far too long. We're just going to look at the relevant details and things that stick out to us, and then we're going to include this in our essay. So let's focus on step 1 right now. I'm going to take you to our example for today. We'll look through the prompt, we'll analyze the table, and of course, we'll do these 2 steps, A and B. Okay, and welcome to our prompt for today. So first, let's read this and just understand what the prompt is asking of us. It says, the table below shows the proportion of people in England who agreed with same-sex marriage from 1989 to 2013. Summarize the information by selecting and reporting the main features, and make comparisons where relevant. Write at least 150 words. This is a very standard prompt. It's telling us exactly what this table has and what we have to do. So first, of course, we're going to analyze this table and just take a look at it. So remember, we're looking at the percentage of people. So all of these numbers here that are not in bold are percentages. Very important to keep this in mind when we are writing the essay. And we see that there are 5 years. So these are in bold at the top and the various religions on the left-hand side. This is a very typical table with dates, so it's a great example to practice with today. So we see here our step 1 is A, to analyze the table and plan how to group the information, and then B, describe key information from each category. So I have this box here which you can use to organize your thoughts and make some notes before you are actually writing the essay. This is a great way to just plan everything out, and you will not waste time making mistakes or changing things while you are writing the essay. So if we look at the first grouping here, we have to understand how to actually group this information. So in order to do that, we really have to just analyze this. Here we see 1989 has the lowest percentage, although no religion does have the highest percentage by a bit. You have 5 and 9% versus 20. And then you see that basically increasing for every group. Of course, some have increased more than others, but the general trend is that things are increasing. We'll worry about the general trend a bit later. For now, let's just look at how to group this. So just looking at this again, you can see that between 1989 and 2007, the percentage of people agreeing with same-sex marriage increased gradually for all religions. This is general. However, between 2007 and 2013, the data shows a sharp increase. So you see how 31 to 55, 37 to 61, these are quite sharp increases, whereas from 1989 to 2007, 9 to 31 is gradual. So I just want to make sure that you're aware of that. From 1989 to 2007, you see that everything is gradual. It happens in stages. But from 2007 to 2013, you can consider, for example, a spike from 19 to 30% in just 6 years, quite a difference when compared to 1989 to 2007. So you might be thinking, how are we supposed to group this information? Because there is some overlap in 2007. And it's fine. Actually, in this case, we're going to work with a range. So it's best if we do it like so. For our first grouping, we are going to describe what happened between 1989 and 2007. So we're going to talk about this gradual increase. Then for our second grouping, we are going to describe what happened between 2007 and 2013. So notice how 2007 is going to be included in both the first paragraph and the second paragraph in a way, because that year represents when this idea shifted and the percentage shifted as well. Okay, so we have analyzed this table to a degree. Now we are going to describe the key information from the categories. And there's a lot of data here, so we have to be selective. The best way to do that is to look at the highest and the lowest pieces of data. So for example, if we look at 1989, we see that 5. So this 5% of people agreeing with same-sex marriage. We're going to highlight this because it is something interesting, it is the lowest, it is important. So we're going to talk about this piece of data. And now, since we are describing what happened between 1989 and 2007, I am going to focus on 1989 and 2007 for my first grouping. So of course, I'm going to highlight this 5. I'm also going to highlight this 20 because it is the largest percentage in 1989. I'm not really going to focus on things from 1995 and 2001. That's because, first off, it would be too much information to include. And second, I want to just highlight the important parts. So I want to emphasize the change between 1989 and 2007. That change is gradual, so we do not need to include specific data points from 1995 and 2001 because we're simply going to say that it gradually increased. So it's understood that these numbers, these percentages in 1995 and 2001 will be higher than our lowest points in 1989. So that's the reason for not including this. If you include data from non-relevant years, it's just going to take up more time, more space, and we're going to go way beyond our 150-word limit. So let's continue on and look at 2007, looking at the highest and the lowest percentages. The lowest is 19% for the non-Christian group, and the highest is 64% for the no religion group. And it's very interesting that it continues to be our highest and low points, just like in 1989. Now for the second grouping, so that's body paragraph 2, we're going to focus on 2007, of course, which we've already done, and then 2013. So for 2013, we see again the non-Christian and no religion group has 30 as its lowest data point, and the highest percentage is 77%. So notice how the highest and the lowest numbers helped us out here. And another key point that you can add to this report is how you see each year the percentage of people agreeing with same-sex marriage increased quite a bit. And that is something we are going to include in our overview paragraph, which I'm going to talk to you about in just a couple of minutes. First, I want to make sure that we are clear on this grouping and these differences. Now, just for myself, I'm going to include some notes so that I am clear on what to write in my essay. I like to make an outline of notes just so that I am ready to tackle the essay. So from 1989 to 2007, I'm going to talk about how support for same-sex marriage increased almost 4 times. And I'm going to just put abbreviation here, 4x. And I got this 4 times just from multiplying 9 times 4, which is 36. 31 is quite close. 37 is quite close. 38 is quite close. 5 times 4 would be 20. 19 is quite close. And although 64 is quite low, it's not exactly 4 times 20, it's still almost 4 times when you look at the general overview of all of those belief systems. And I am going to discuss how no religion and non-Christians show both the highest and the lowest amount of support. So I'm also just going to include that. I'll write non-Christian as lowest support and no religion as highest. Now, of course, my table is going to have abbreviations. Your table might look a bit different, but it's just important that you are able to understand this. I'm also going to talk about a gap in support of same-sex marriage. And this gap also increased throughout the time period from 1989 to 2007. So if you see, for example, followers of other religions, not necessarily non-Christians, but the other religions are between 2 and 3 times more likely to support same-sex marriage. And I'm getting this from looking at the Church of England, Roman Catholic, and other Christian compared to just the non-Christian group. Now for body paragraph 2, I am going to talk about support from all of the religions and how this increased in a short amount of time. So this is very important, and this is why our second grouping has just 2007 and 2013. I'm going to talk about the proportion of Christians pretty much doubled between 50 and 60%. So we're looking at 2007 here and 2013 for these first 3 Christian groups. So I'm going to say Christian, and I'll just put a CH for that. Christian groups doubled, and I'll say between 50 and 60%. And then I will talk about non-Christians and those without a religion. So I'll put non-Christians and no religion, like I used here in the first paragraph. These increased to about 1/3 and also 3/4. So you see here, this increase from non-Christians is about 1/3 from 2007 to 2013. The share of non-Christians who supported same-sex marriage or agreed with it went to about 1/3, whereas those with no religion went to just over 3/4. So I'm looking at these 2 final numbers in 2013. And then, of course, I could talk about the gap between all religions. That had also further increased. So with this increase in a short amount of time, we also have a higher gap between religions. And these are just my notes from analyzing the table. I'm going to, of course, include all of this in a much neater and logical way in our essay. But just note that this is how we analyze the table, plan how to group the information, and then describe this key information, these numbers in red, from your 2 categories. You might be thinking that this is taking a bit long. This is just because I want to make sure that you're understanding exactly why I've picked these points and why I'm including it in a certain way. With time and practice, you'll be able to perfect this step, and this should really only take you a few minutes. It is very important, though, because without this step, you wouldn't really know what to write in your essay, and that would just take longer because you'd be scrambling while you are writing. So do not skip this step. Now that we've done this, I want to go back to our presentation about step 2, and I also want to explain how we are going to include all of this information in a logical way in our essay, and that will include an outline. So let's do that, and then we'll see you back here to write the essay. Okay, and we're back with our guide. Now, remember, for the second step, we are going to write an essay using the recommended essay structure. But before we do that, there is sort of like a bonus step that we'll have to do, and that is summarize the overall trend. Now, we briefly talked about this in our step 1, which we just did when looking at the prompt and analyzing the table, but basically we're going to do 2 things here. We're going to make sure that we summarize the overview of the main groupings, and we did this when we looked at the gaps and we talked about how, in general, the percentages were increasing. And when we do this, we are not going to mention specifics. So you definitely don't want to mention any specific data points or talk about percentages here. This is just an overview. We're going to leave the specifics for the first and the second body paragraphs. This is a common mistake here, especially with tables that have dates or date ranges. Don't worry, you don't have to include specifics here. Just look at the overall trend. This is the same for most of the writing task 1 prompts, so just stick to this idea. And we need to include the overall trend because it fits with the order of our paragraphs. So for our outline that we're going to follow, it's going to have an introduction. Then it's going to have this overview paragraph, which will include the information I just talked about. Then we'll have body paragraph 1 and body paragraph 2. So just to summarize, in our introduction, we are going to include a paraphrased task question. I'll show you how I do this when I write the essay in the next step in just a few minutes. But we're going to basically restate the prompt using different words and synonyms. This is a great way to just introduce your piece of writing. Then in the overview paragraph, we're going to write a general overview of the 2 main groupings that we looked at and analyzed in the previous step. And then our last 2 paragraphs are going to be body paragraph 1, which will include detail about the first grouping in a logical way. And then we're going to include detail about the second grouping also in a logical way. So we're going to include the points that we talked about in our table and the points that we read about in a nice, coherent way. And this is a foolproof outline to use because we'll make sure that everything pertinent is in our essay and things that aren't so important do not need to be in here. Having a great outline is important just so that you can approach your essay in a logical way, but it's also very important for the scoring. So let's just take a minute and examine the scoring. First off, we've got our task achievement. So this is going to be looking at how we answer the question. Did we summarize the main points? Did we write at least 150 words? Did we add relevant information by looking at the data on the table? This is basically just understanding whether or not we've answered the question. Coherence and cohesion goes right along with our outline. So the examiner will want to know that everything makes sense, that it's organized in a clear way, and that it's logical. So in this case, you don't want to start out with body paragraph 1 and finish with a paraphrased task question. You really want to introduce your topic, give an overview, and then write your details. And then the last 2 points rely really on your outside knowledge and your preparation when it comes to lexical resource and your grammatical range and accuracy. So you want to make sure you're using great synonyms, high-level vocabulary, scientific and analytical language, as well as your grammatical range. So pay attention to your tenses. If we're talking about the past, make sure to use past tense, present perfect when necessary. If you're talking about the future and speculation, then that changes things a bit, and you'll have to focus on future tenses, perhaps future perfect. In most cases, when you're looking at a table with dates, you are definitely going to include at least some of the past tense because you'll probably have dates in the past. So always keep this in mind. All right, so now that we have examined the second step in our outline, let's put this all into practice and start writing our essay. Okay, and we're back with our writing prompt in our area to write the essay. Before we do that, like I said, I just want to go over the overall trend and the overview. This is quite simple and something we've already looked at. I just want to make sure that we can write it down to make notes. Like we saw with our table, basically in general, support for same-gender marriage increased from 1989 to 2013. So I'm just going to say that it increased, making a special note of the last 5 years. So that is our second grouping, 2007 to 2013. And basically these groupings have stayed the same. We see that non-Christian tended to be on the more conservative side, and they are still in the conservative side at the end of 2013 here. So I'm also going to note that in the overview paragraph. But remember here, we're just looking at everything. We are not talking about specific data points. Now here I've got the 4 headings for our 4 different paragraphs. This is just for you to follow along and just to make sure that everything is clear. When you are writing for practice and when you're writing on the exam, you do not want to include these headings. By that time, you should know which paragraph is which. So just use these for your own knowledge and your own organization in this video. All right, so let's get started with our introduction, which remember is just going to paraphrase what we have here in our prompt. So I'm going to say the table provides data on the percentage of people of 5 differing belief systems in agreement with same-sex marriage in England over 5 time intervals. And we'll talk about the language and the vocabulary and the grammar after this video, but for now, just understand that this is paraphrase. It's not using the same words, but it's saying the same thing. And that is all we need to introduce this topic. It's everything that was included in our writing prompt. So I'm going to go straight to the overview. And remember, we're going to use these notes up here. So I'm going to say, overall, support for same-gender marriage increased more than 5-fold between 1989 and 2013, especially over the last 5 years, with those claiming no religion as the most tolerant from beginning to end, while those of a belief different to Christianity remained the most conservative. And that is exactly what we talked about earlier. So I made note between the last 5 years, 5-fold, because I'm looking at the amounts from 1989 and 2013. And so I've included that in the overview paragraph. Now, that is really all we need as well, because we don't want to be very specific with this paragraph. We just want the overall trend. And it is true that those who have a belief different to Christianity remain the most conservative with the lowest number. So I'm going to continue on with our body paragraph 1 at this point. And I'm going to use these notes here to write this paragraph. And I'll start off by saying, between 1989 and 2007, support for same-sex marriage increased almost 4 times for people of all belief systems, with the highest support among those reporting no religion, and non-Christians showing the lowest at just less than 1 in 5 in 2007. And remember, we looked at that right here. Instead of saying 5%, I said 1 in 5. Now I'll continue and I'll say, interestingly, the gap in support of same-sex marriage between religions also increased over said period, with followers of other religions between 2 and 3 times more likely to support same-sex marriage than non-Christians in 2007. And remember, this information is looking from the numbers at 1989 from Christian groups and comparing those to the numbers in 2001. So you see that these are between 2 and 3 times higher. All right, and that is exactly everything we wanted to include for body paragraph 1. We did talk about this gap between religions, which increased. And so we're ready to go to body paragraph 2. And for this, I'm going to start off by saying, by 2013, support among all denominations increased the fastest in the shortest time. The proportion of Christians in agreement almost doubled to between 50 and 60%, whereas the number of non-Christians and those without a religion increased to around 1/3 and 3/4, respectively. And remember, this was looking at 1/3 and 3/4, like we talked about earlier in our note-taking time. Lastly, I'm just going to say the gap between all religions had further increased by that time, because I'm talking about 2013. And that is everything that we wanted to include from our table in the second paragraph. And there you have it. We have included the introduction, overview, and the details. Now I'm going to clean this up and we'll look at the important words and phrases, look at the word count, and really dissect this information. Now, as you'll see, the word count is 210 words. This is great. We have hit the mark of 150 words, but we haven't gone too overboard with it. We included all of the pertinent information. without adding too much detail. Again, if we had included things from 1995 and 2001, it really would have just been too much. So remember to only look at your relevant points, and that will definitely fulfill your minimum. Now, let's look at the synonyms and topic vocabulary in blue. I'm going to start with our introduction paragraph because remember, this was the paraphrased paragraph. So we see the table provides instead of shows the proportion. I said provides data on and the percentage of people of 5 differing belief systems. Here, this says people in England. Now, I already talked about differing belief systems because that is what I see in the table, and this is good topic vocabulary to have. Belief systems, very similar to religion. Now, I also said same-sex marriage here in England over 5-time intervals, instead of saying 1989 to 2013. So see how we're saying the same thing, but just doing it in different terms. The examiner will look at this because it's important that we can use synonyms well and still express the same thing. For our overview paragraph, overall is a great way to start that, so I've included it as a functional word. And I said support for same-gender marriage instead of saying same-sex. Again, I said same-gender, which means the same thing. I have 5-fold. This is a great way to just show that it is 5 times between 1989 and 2013. Now remember, since we are being specific here between 2 dates, we use the past simple. Very important to remember this grammar. And here I talked about a belief different to Christianity, which is just a different way to say non-Christian so as not to repeat myself over and over. I also have between in the first body paragraph as a functional word because I'm talking about 2 different dates. So between these 2 dates, I saw that support for same-sex marriage increased almost 4 times. This is also a useful vocabulary phrase for these types of writing prompts. 5-fold, 4 times. This is all talking about times and numbers, but doing so in a scientific way. Less than 1 in 5 is also a great way to talk about a percentage. Here I have interestingly because I want to note something that is interesting. It caught my eye, and so using interestingly is a great functional word. In support of and followers are 2 types of phrases that really help when talking about religion. So in support of something, followers of religions, and then again we have a great vocabulary phrase here, 2 and 3 times more likely to. This includes a lot of information in just a short phrase. Instead of saying 1 sentence for those that are 2 times more likely and 1 sentence for those that are 3 times more likely, I've just included it all together and really made things concise. Then in our second body paragraph, we have by 2013. I also have this as a functional word because we're talking about everything up to that point. Denominations is another great way to talk about religion, which we saw here in our heading. Then in agreement is also a great topic vocabulary for this specific question because it looks at those who are agreeing, or again, in agreement with a certain idea. Doubled to is a great vocabulary phrase in order to say 2 times. However, I already said 4 times and 5-fold, so I wanted to change it up a little bit, and that's where I said doubled. Whereas is a great functional word to show a contrasting idea, and my favorite right here, respectively. This is very important when you want to be concise. So I said the number of non-Christians and those without a religion increased to around 1/3 and 3/4 respectively. Just by adding this word respectively, it is clear that non-Christians increased to 1/3 and those without a religion increased to 3/4 more or less. So you can say the same thing again in 1 sentence, which will really help you with your coherence and cohesion, and also by not writing too many words. And then we have the past perfect, very important. The gap between all religions had further increased by 2013. So it's great that we have the past perfect in here as well, because you want to add as much advanced vocabulary and grammar as possible just to get your points up, of course, if it makes sense and is done so in a logical way. So there you have it. That is our essay. Again, with time and practice, you'll be able to do all of this in your 20-minute time frame, which you want to stick with so that you are prepared for the exam. Now that we've done this, let's go ahead and wrap up this lesson. Great job today. Here are some do's and don'ts for the table analysis with dates wrap-up. Things you want to do. Make sure you are analyzing your table before writing. The worst thing you could do is start writing immediately while you are analyzing your table. This will just lead to chaos, confusion, and you'll lose points for your coherence and cohesion. So do what we did today. Analyze your table. Understand the relevant points. Again, you don't want to include everything because that would be far too long. So understand your highest and lowest points and plan out how to describe that information in a handy table or an outline like we looked at today. Then, before you start writing, you also want to understand the overall trend. Sometimes this will happen as you are understanding relevant points like we saw today. And then you're going to organize your essay using that foolproof method of your introduction, outline, and your 2 body paragraphs. Things you don't want to do, like I said earlier, don't start writing the essay immediately. You might think that it'll save you time, but in the long run, it's going to cause chaos, and you won't have an overall argument and a clear logical flow. Then you don't want to write the wrong amount. It's very easy to get ahead of yourself with this, especially when it comes to tables with dates. You might feel like you have to include all of the dates or a data point from each date, and that really is not the case. So you want to stick to your minimum of 150 and do not go too far overboard. We were at the right amount today, around 200. And then you don't want to group your categories strangely. You really want to look for a trend in your dates or in your date range. Don't be afraid to do what we did today. So we used 1989 up until 2007, and then we reused 2007 in our second group when looking at 2013, and that is fine. You can do that because you're looking at a date range. Just don't do anything strange and jump around your dates